Ambassador Wilson, Tony Snow, the president's spokesman today, said that you have a veracity problem. They don't trust you. What do you make of that?
Well, I certainly don't know what they're talking about. After all, it was Mr. Libby who was convicted of lying, perjury, and obstruction of justice, and it's the President of the United States who's decided that he would commute a sentence, thereby raising the very real suspicion that he's participant in a cover-up and an ongoing obstruction of justice. So I don't know what they're talking about, but they have been trying to make this about me from the very beginning, when in fact it's about them. It's about the lies they use to justify the war. It's about the betrayal of the national security and the leak of a covert CIA officer's identity to the press.
Okay, let's talk about those important things then. Let's talk about the war and how history is going to write this episode, which may conclude with this commutation of Scooter Libby's sentence today. Start with this. What was the Vice President, Dick Cheney, what was their role in selling the war, especially the nuclear piece of this war, of why we went to war?
Well, all I can do is speak from personal experience, and when I went out to the CIA in February of 2002, at which the question was asked, how do we answer the question posed by the Office of the Vice President about allegations of uranium sales from the West African nation of Niger to Iraq? I was asked during that meeting whether I would be willing to go out and look into that allegation in Niger. I said, and the record bears this out, that I didn't see any particular reason to do so because we had a competent embassy there. But if I was asked by my government, I would be happy to do it.
And so you determined what? That there wasn't an effort by Saddam Hussein to buy uranium materials?
I spent 8 days out there. I spoke to everybody that I knew. Mine was one of 3 reports that were submitted, all of which said there was nothing to this particular allegation.
Okay, let me ask you about this question. When did you sense that the White House was trying to destroy your reputation?
Well, it was pretty clear to me shortly after I wrote my article, when Mr. Novak spoke to a friend of mine on the street and said Wilson's a blank and his wife works for the CIA, that the nature of the smear campaign they were going to run against me was going to include the betrayal of her identity as a covert CIA officer. And that would have been around July 8th or July 9th.
And so, by your testimony here on this program and before in other arenas, you're making a case that the Vice President basically used misinformation to sell the country on the war with Iraq, including especially the nuclear piece. There wasn't a nuclear case, right? You believe that?
Well, what I have said repeatedly is not the Vice President asked what I believe was a legitimate question. If you're senior enough to ask the question, you're senior enough to get the answer. That question was relayed to the CIA from the Office of the Vice President. I was told it was the Office of the Vice President that asked the question. It was only later that the Vice President himself told Mr. Russert that, in fact, he did raise the question. But what I have said repeatedly is it was the President of the United States who uttered the lie in the State of the Union address, the famous 16 words. Now, presumably, that State of the Union address would have been vetted not just by the respective agencies, who apparently did not do a very good job, but also by the National Security Advisor, the Vice President, and the President. I will say this. The Assistant Secretary for African Affairs at the time, Walter Kansteiner, subsequently told me that he asked me, he said, do you believe, rhetorically, that we would have actually allowed that language to get in the State of the Union address had we seen the speech before it was delivered?
And so you believe that the Vice President and the President put out false information that they should have known better based upon your report back from Niger?
Not just my report, but all the reporting that was done, including the reports to the Congress by the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence and to the White House by the Director of Central Intelligence, and a paper circulated in January of 2003. And
so we have a case here, and I'm just trying to build this information. First of all, that the war was sold to us under false pretenses because you had given them better information that they had in fact requested that the State Department and the CIA rather provide for them. And then, of course, they went after you. Do you believe that they went after you because you were a war critic?
I believe they went after me for 3 reasons. One, I think they went after me to punish me. 2, I think they wanted to send a signal to the foreign policy and intelligence community that if you do to us what Wilson just did to us, we will do to you what we just did to his family. And 3, I think they made the assessment that I was a Democrat and therefore could be treated like a cockroach, even though I had served this president's father as the acting ambassador in Baghdad in the first Gulf War.
Well, what about the fact of the trial? You must have paid attention to the trial of Scooter Libby. During the course of the trial, Scooter Libby obviously did not provide the information to the state that the state wanted with regard to the vice president, because at the end of the hearing, we discovered that the prosecutor, Patrick Fitzgerald, said in public that Scooter Libby was like a baseball player who throws dust in the face of the umpire so he can't render a verdict on the play. In other words, Scooter Libby prevented Special Prosecutor Fitzgerald from determining the exact role he played with regard to his boss, the vice president. What did you learn watching the trial?
Well, first of all, the special prosecutor actually first said that at the time of the indictment. After the conviction of Mr. Libby on 4 counts of lying, perjury, and obstruction of justice, Mr. Fitzgerald repeated that. He also said that Mr. Libby had lied blatantly and repeatedly, and that as a consequence of his repeated lies and obstruction of justice, there remained a cloud over the office of the vice president.
And now the question is, where does that cloud lead us now? That we have now, according to your testimony, about 4 layers of cover-up. The cover-up in the case of sowing the war, the cover-up in the attempt to try to shut you up, the cover-up during the course of the trial, which was pointed out as part of the investigation by Special Prosecutor Fitzgerald, and now this commutation. Do you believe that the commutation is part of a cover-up?
This president is very stingy with pardons and commutations. You may recall that when he was governor of Texas, he refused to commute the sentence of Carla Faye Tucker, despite the entreaties of the Pope and Pat Robertson. And so for him to commute the sentence of Scooter Libby, which was not an unduly harsh sentence according to the justice system, really smacks a quid pro quo. And the question that needs to be raised is whether or not the president was commuting Mr. Libby's sentence in order to protect the vice president of the United States and or perhaps protect his own office and himself as well.
Do you believe that there was a deal here between the president, the vice president, Scooter Libby, that if he didn't point the finger of blame at his boss, the man who he apparently worked hand in glove with, that would be Vice President Cheney, that he would get special treatment here in regard to either a pardon or a commutation?
I believe it stinks to high heaven, and the president owes the American public an explanation, beginning with releasing both his statement to the special prosecutor as well as the vice president's statement to the special prosecutor. And if he's not prepared to come clean with the American people, I believe the U.S. Congress should use all of its powers to force the issue.
So the question now, Ambassador Wilson, is who is going to be the forum? I mean, you have a legal case, a civil case moving forward. Are you confident that's going to get standing and move ahead?
We continue to have great confidence in the American system of justice. We believe our case got the appropriate hearing from Judge Bates, who's the justice in this matter. We have every expectation that it will go forward, and we're prepared to fight to the bitter end on this because we want the truth to come out. We want those officials who engage in this behavior to be held to account, and most particularly, we want to deter future generations of public servants from engaging in such despicable political vendettas and abuse of power.
Ambassador Wilson, do you believe that the Congress has a role to play here?
Indeed, I do. In the absence of the president coming clean with the American people, I believe the Congress has no option but to insist through hearings that the truth be brought out.
What role do you think the political campaign for president is going to play in clearing the air here, especially the role of Hillary Clinton?
Well, I certainly have no idea. I have great admiration for many of the candidates who are running on the Democratic side. I think the Republicans, having sold their those candidates who have apparently sold their soul to this small sect of neoconservatives, will demonstrate the extent to which the Republican Party really is prepared to turn its back on the rule of law and the system of justice that has underpinned this country for 230 years.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador Joseph Wilson, who's out in Santa Fe, New Mexico, for coming on Hardball on this big news-making night. Thank you, Ambassador.